Picture this: the clang of steel on steel echoes across the battlefield as a knight, encased in gleaming armor, charges forward. Every movement is precise, every strike calculated. But behind the valor and the glory lies a hidden truth. That suit of armor didn't stay flawless on its own. Imagine the hours, the meticulous care, the relentless effort it took to keep those metal plates shining, functional, and ready for combat. This is the untold story of medieval warfare, not just the battles, but the quiet, grueling labor that happened behind the scenes. How did knights keep their armor in top condition? The answer is more fascinating and far messier than you might think. Armor wasn't just a suit of metal, it was a lifeline. A single dent could mean the difference between deflecting a deadly blow or suffering a fatal wound. Rust wasn't just unsightly, it weakened the steel, leaving a knight vulnerable. Yet maintenance wasn't as simple as wiping down a blade. This was an art form, a science, and sometimes even a race against time. Imagine a knight after a long campaign, his armor caked in mud, sweat, and even blood. Without the right care, that prized suit could become a death trap. So how did they do it? The methods were ingenious, often surprising, and sometimes downright bizarre. From secret polishing techniques passed down through generations to the unexpected role of sand and vinegar in keeping metal pristine, the world of armor care is a treasure trove of forgotten wisdom. And it wasn't just about looks. Proper maintenance could mean surviving another day on the battlefield. So let's step into the workshop, the armory, and even the field camps where knights fought not just with swords, but with brushes, oils, and relentless dedication. Together, we'll uncover the gritty reality behind those shining suits of armor, and the extraordinary lengths knights went to keep them battle-ready. A knight's armor was more than just protection. It was his second skin, his last line of defense against arrows, swords, and morning stars. But metal doesn't stay strong on its own. Left unchecked, rust could eat through plates like a hidden enemy, turning what should have deflected a blade into a brittle death trap. A single neglected hinge might seize up mid-battle, leaving a knight unable to lift his arm as an opponent's strike came crashing down. Even minor dents, seemingly harmless, could redirect blows inward instead of glancing them away, turning armor into a liability. Survival wasn't just about skill with a sword. It depended on keeping every buckle, every rivet, every polished surface in perfect working order. And it wasn't just about functionality. A knight's armor was a walking advertisement of his wealth and status. In tournaments where nobles gathered to show off their prowess, a tarnished suit signaled neglect, or worse, poverty. Imagine the whispers in the crowd if a knight arrived with rust streaking his breastplate like ugly scars. Reputation mattered as much as steel, and meticulous upkeep was a public display of discipline. Kings and lords judged men by the state of their gear. A well-maintained suit whispered, "This knight takes nothing for granted," but the stakes were highest on the battlefield. Unlike tournaments, there were no squires standing by with spare pieces. A snapped strap or a stuck visor could mean suffocation in the mud under the weight of one's own armor. Stories survive of knights drowning in shallow puddles because their helmets jammed shut. Others bled out from wounds that should have been superficial if only their mail hadn't been frayed from poor storage, letting a blade slip through the weakened rings. Armor wasn't just equipment, it was a life support system that demanded constant vigilance. So how did they fight these invisible threats? The methods were as brutal as the consequences. Rust required relentless scrubbing with abrasive sands or pumice stones, a labor so exhausting it often fell to squires for hours each day. Leather straps needed constant oiling to stay flexible. Left dry, they'd crack like old parchment in winter. Even the way armor was stored mattered. Hanging it near damp castle walls invited corrosion, while piling it carelessly risked dents that could misalign the plates. Every knight knew neglect wasn't laziness, it was a death sentence in slow motion. At dawn, before even breaking their fast, knights and their squires would begin the relentless daily battle against rust and grime. Picture a squire kneeling in the dim light of the armory, a rough linen cloth in one hand and a flask of precious oil in the other. Every inch of metal had to be inspected, not just for mud or blood from yesterday's training. but for the faintest trace of moisture that could birth corrosion overnight. They worked methodically, like surgeons tending to a living thing, because in many ways, armor was alive. Left untended, it would decay. The process was methodical. First, any visible dirt or debris was brushed away with stiff bristled horsehair brushes, tools as essential as a sword for a knight on campaign. Then came the wiping, using cloths often soaked in vinegar or mild acidic solutions to break down stubborn grime without damaging the metal. But the real secret lay in the oils. Animal fats, like lard from pigs, were common in earlier centuries, though no knight wanted to smell like a butcher while riding into battle. By the late medieval period, more refined oils, like linseed or even specialized mixtures infused with herbs, became prized for their protective qualities and subtle fragrances. A thin, even coat was the goal. Too much would attract dust, too little would leave the metal vulnerable. Weather dictated urgency. On damp mornings, when dew clung to everything, squires worked with frenzied precision. A single mist spot could turn into a reddish-brown blemish within days. After cleaning, armor wasn't simply stored, it was hung on wooden stands designed to keep pieces separated, allowing air to circulate and preventing the dreaded kiss of rust where metal touched metal. Even the choice of storage room mattered. Armories were often placed in the driest part of a castle, sometimes with smoldering charcoal braziers to ward off humidity. But maintenance didn't stop at the castle gates. On campaign, knights carried compact kits, small rolls of oiled cloth, pouches of fine sand for scouring, and sometimes even portable whetstones for quick edge repairs. A knight resting after a day's march might personally tend to his gauntlets or gorget, knowing no squire could be as meticulous as the man whose life depended on it. There's a reason surviving accounts describe warriors polishing their armor by firelight, the rhythmic sound of cloth on metal blending with the crackle of flames. It wasn't just duty, it was survival, a ritual as vital as sharpening a blade or tightening a saddle. The irony, the very act of cleaning could be perilous. Oils were flammable, and stories exist of careless squires igniting their lord's armor by storing it too close to torches. Others, rushing the job, left greasy residues that turned smooth plates treacherous in battle, their wearers sliding from saddles with mortifying ease. Mastery wasn't just about diligence, it was about understanding armor's whims, its hidden vulnerabilities, and the delicate balance between preservation and practicality. And so, day after day, the cycle repeated, not with the drama of a joust or the fury of a charge, but with quiet, unyielding devotion, because in the end, a knight's armor was only as strong as the care it received, and no hero could afford to let his guard down, even when the battlefield lay silent. Rust was the silent enemy, creeping across armor like a plague if left unchecked. But knights and their squires had an arsenal of weapons to fight it, tools as varied as the threats they faced. One of the most common methods involved vinegar, not just for cooking, but as a potent ally against corrosion. A cloth soaked in vinegar would be rubbed vigorously over the affected area, the mild acid breaking down rust without eating into the steel beneath. For thicker buildup, they'd mix vinegar with fine sand or crushed pumice, creating a gritty paste that scrubbed away corrosion like a medieval exfoliant. Wooden or bone scrapers were the delicate instruments of this art. Too much metal on metal risked scratching or gouging the armor, so these softer tools let squires work with precision. Imagine a squire hunched over a pauldron, carefully guiding a smooth bone scraper along the curves, peeling away rust flakes without damaging the intricate engraving beneath. It was painstaking work. A single careless slip could ruin hours of polishing. Some accounts even mention using stale bread as an impromptu abrasive, its crusty texture gentle enough for light cleaning yet effective enough to tackle surface rust. But not all grime was equal. Blood and mud required different tactics. Fresh blood was rinsed quickly with water, as letting it dry made removal far harder. Dried mud, however, demanded brute force, stiff, bristled brushes made from boar's hair or horsehair, their toughness perfect for dislodging caked on filth. For the stubbornest patches, heated vinegar or even urine, thanks to its ammonia content, could loosen the grip of grime that refused to budge. The process wasn't just functional, it was strategic. Over-polishing could wear down thin areas, making armor vulnerable. Knights learned to balance aggression with restraint, removing rust without thinning the metal, scrubbing hard enough to clean but not so hard that they compromised their own protection. And speed mattered. On campaign, armor couldn't sit idle for days. A knight might need his cuirass battle ready by morning, so squires worked in shifts, their hands cramping as they labored through the night by torchlight. Oddly, some rust was tolerated not out of laziness, but practicality. A thin, even patina called stable rust could actually protect against deeper corrosion, like a shield of its own. The trick was controlling it, ensuring it never grew thick or flaky. This subtle understanding separated adequate care from true mastery, because in the end, armor maintenance wasn't just about removing damage, it was about knowing when to fight the decay and when to make peace with it. The secrets of armor lubrication weren't just about slathering on any oily substance. Knights and their squires had recipes as carefully guarded as a family heirloom. Across Europe, regional quirks shaped these protective mixtures, turning routine maintenance into a craft steeped in local tradition. In colder northern climates like England and Germany, thick animal fats ruled. Rendered lard from pigs or bears created a heavy barrier against relentless dampness. These greases stayed viscous even in frost, ensuring hinges and joints didn't stiffen when winter winds howled through castle courtyards. But there was a trade-off: the pungent smell of rancid fat clinging to armor after weeks of campaigning, a stench so potent it could betray a knight's position before his banner came into view. Mediterranean knights faced the opposite problem: scorching heat that turned thick oils into sticky, dripping messes. Here, lighter solutions flourished. Olive oil, abundant in regions like Italy and Spain, became the base for sophisticated blends, sometimes infused with crushed rosemary or lavender to mask the metallic tang of sweat-soaked armor. These aromatic oils weren't just practical, they whispered of status. A knight riding into a Sicilian tournament with the scent of wild herbs trailing behind him wasn't just protected from rust, he was making a statement. Yet the most prized recipes were those passed down through armorer guilds, their exact ratios guarded like alchemical secrets. Some added beeswax to oil mixtures, creating a weather-resistant seal that repelled both rain and dust. Others swore by fish oil, despite its notorious reek, because its unique properties prevented cracking in freezing temperatures. There's evidence of experimental blends incorporating everything from walnut oil to rendered duck fat, each claiming superiority. A surviving 15th century French text even describes a luxurious concoction involving rosewater and crushed pearls, purportedly used by nobility to keep their tournament armor gleaming under the summer sun. Application was its own art. Too little oil left metal vulnerable, while excess attracted grime that could grind between plates like sandpaper. Squires learned to warm oils slightly before rubbing them into crevices, ensuring thin, even coverage. Joints, elbows, knees, finger articulations demanded extra attention, their constant movement making them corrosion hotspots. Some knights carried small horn flasks of their preferred lubricant strapped to their belts, ready for emergency touch-ups mid-campaign. But oils weren't just about preservation. Proper lubrication meant survival in battle. A well-greased suit allowed near-silent movement, crucial for knights needing stealth in ambushes or nighttime raids. Conversely, the shriek of unoiled hinges could betray an entire patrol. Stories persist of clever commanders ordering their men to let armor creak intentionally during feigned retreats, luring overconfident enemies into traps. The quest for the perfect lubricant even birthed superstitions. Some knights insisted oils applied under a full moon lasted longer, while others avoided pork fats during Lent, fearing divine disapproval. One eccentric Burgundian chronicle claims a duke refused to wear armor greased with anything but bear fat harvested during the animal's winter sleep, convinced it held mystical protective properties. In the end, these rituals, whether practical or peculiar, revealed an essential truth. Keeping armor battle ready wasn't just maintenance, it was a dialogue between warrior and metal, a daily reaffirmation that survival depended as much on patience and knowledge as on strength or courage. Every oiled joint, every fragrant plate, carried the weight of that unspoken promise to honor the armor as it honored the knight. In the glittering world of medieval tournaments, a knight's armor wasn't just armor, it was a mirror reflecting his honor, wealth, and skill. While battlefield maintenance focused on survival, the lead up to a tournament transformed polishing into an art form bordering on obsession. Picture the scene. Days before the event, squires labored like alchemists, their hands blackened by concoctions of chalk, vinegar, and crushed gemstones, all to achieve a sheen so brilliant it could blind spectators in the midday sun. This wasn't mere vanity, it was psychological warfare. A knight arriving with armor that gleamed like liquid silver sent an unmistakable message: I spare no effort, and neither will I spare you. The tools of this prestige ritual were as specialized as surgical instruments. Instead of coarse sand, squires used finely ground pumice mixed with rose water, creating a polish gentle enough to preserve delicate engravings but potent enough to erase every fingerprint. For the final buffing, they'd switch to linen cloths woven with silk threads, each stroke calculated to produce a flawless, almost glass-like finish. Some wealthy knights even employed sun tests, holding a breastplate at angles to sunlight, rejecting any piece that showed the faintest streak or watermark. But the true masters of this craft knew that luster alone wasn't enough. Strategic dulling played its part. To accentuate ridges and embossed coats of arms, they'd darken recessed areas with smoke or acid-etched stains, creating dramatic contrasts that made designs leap to the eye from across the lists. A German manuscript from 1483 describes competitors rubbing graphite into crevices to make their gold inlay sing like fire against shadow. The stakes skyrocketed when royalty attended. Before Henry VIII's famous tournaments, armorers worked in shifts, sleepless, knowing a single smudge on a duke's cuirass could ruin careers. One account tells of a French squire exiled for letting his lords bever tarnish mid-event, a humiliation worse than defeat. Conversely, the right shine could bring unimaginable rewards. After the young Charles of Burgundy appeared at a joust with armor polished to such perfection that spectators swore it glowed, his father gifted the polishing team lands and titles. Yet beneath this spectacle lay a darker truth: the human cost. Squires suffered eye damage from hours staring at reflective surfaces, while toxic mercury-based polishes prized for their unreal shimmer slowly poisoned entire workshops. The quest for perfection even birthed bizarre tricks, like the English knight who allegedly had his armor polished with distilled wine, believing the sugars would create a harder gloss. It didn't just attract swarms of bees during his first charge. In the end, tournament polishing revealed a paradox: that radiant surface, so painstakingly achieved, was destined to be scarred by lance blows and trampled into mud. But for one fleeting moment before combat, when sunlight struck those immaculate plates, a knight became more than a warrior. He became a legend forged in light. And that, perhaps, was worth every blister, every drop of sweat, every ruined cloth. For in a world where reputation was armor unto itself, no shine was too bright, no effort too extreme. After the last polish, after the final inspection, armor faced its most vulnerable moment: storage. Left unprotected, even the most meticulously maintained suit could succumb to rust in days. Medieval armories weren't just rooms. They were sanctuaries, engineered to outwit humidity and time. Picture a vaulted chamber deep within a castle's thickest walls, where wooden stands shaped like human torsos stood sentinel. Each suit of armor was disassembled and placed on these forms, not piled haphazardly, but arranged with the precision of a surgeon's toolkit. The stands kept pieces separated, allowing air to flow between them, preventing the dreaded kiss of rust where metal touched metal. But wood alone wasn't enough. Armorers knew that even the driest castles held hidden moisture, so they lined storage chests with woolen cloth, not just any fabric, but thick, lanolin-rich fleece that repelled dampness like a thatched roof sheds rain. Some accounts describe linens soaked in salt or powdered lime, laid between plates to absorb lingering humidity. For particularly precious suits, especially those worn by nobility, layers of beeswax-coated parchment were wrapped around each piece before storage, creating a cocoon that locked out air and moisture like a medieval vacuum seal. Location mattered as much as method. The ideal armory sat far from kitchens, stables, or anywhere steam or animal breath might seep in. Windows were shuttered or non-existent sunlight might dazzle, but its warmth created condensation as temperatures shifted. Instead, ventilation came from cleverly placed vents near ceilings, where rising damp air could escape. Some inventories mention braziers of smoldering charcoal tucked into corners, their faint heat keeping the room's atmosphere as dry as a desert wind. Yet the greatest threat wasn't neglect, it was haste. After battle or a rain-soaked journey, impatient storage could doom armor faster than any enemy's blade. A wise knight insisted every piece be bone dry before resting in its stand. Some even employed a trick borrowed from sailors, stuffing articulated joints with crushed oats or barley, grains that absorbed moisture like sponges and could be replaced daily until no hint of damp remained. Travel posed its own challenges. Nobles on campaign couldn't haul wooden stands across muddy battlefields, so they relied on rolled armor cases, long tubes of waxed canvas or leather, internally partitioned to keep pieces from clanging together. These could be hung from saddle pommels or tent poles, suspended away from ground moisture. Records from the 100 Years' War describe English knights using oiled sheepskin rolls that doubled as emergency bedrolls, their armor nestled inside like swords and scabbards. The poorest knights, lacking dedicated storage, turned superstition into strategy. Some hung armor near church altars, believing holiness warded off decay, though in reality, the incense-laden air's low humidity helped. Others buried small iron tokens called rust nails beneath floorboards, a folkloric charm that curiously worked. The sacrificial metal oxidized first, sparing the armor. In the end, these methods revealed a truth sharper than any dagger's edge. A knight's relationship with his armor didn't end when the visor lifted. Whether resting in a duke's vault or a mercenary's tent role, that metal skin demanded vigilance even in peace. Because rust never slept, and neither could those who relied on steel to wake alive another dawn. For all its strength in battle, a knight's armor was shockingly vulnerable on the road. Imagine a column of mounted warriors winding through mountain passes or fording rivers, their precious cargo clanking with every step. Rain, mud, and relentless jostling could undo weeks of meticulous care in a single day's march. Transporting armor wasn't just inconvenient, it was a logistical nightmare that demanded ingenious solutions. The first challenge was weight. A full suit of plate armor could tip the scales at nearly 60 pounds, manageable when worn, but grueling to carry over distance. Knights on long campaigns often split their armor into sections, packing it across multiple saddlebags or even distributing pieces among squires. Disassembly was key. Greaves strapped to one horse, the cuirass secured to another, with gauntlets and helmets tucked into specially padded leather satchels. This wasn't just about convenience. It prevented the constant grinding of metal on metal that could wear down edges or scrape off protective oils. But disassembly introduced new dangers. Loose pieces risked getting lost or dented, so specialized travel cases emerged, not the rigid trunks we might imagine, but flexible, tube-like containers made from layers of waxed canvas or boiled leather. These could be rolled tight and lashed to saddles, their interiors lined with fleece or straw to cushion against impacts. Some designs even featured internal compartments stitched to match armor contours, keeping each piece snug in its designated slot. A well-made case was as vital as the armor itself. Surviving records from Burgundy detail fines levied on squires who allowed their lord's travel rolls to become soaked through or foul with neglect. Weather dictated strategy. In dry climates, armor might be wrapped in oiled wool before packing, creating a barrier against dust. Wet conditions called for more drastic measures, waterproof cases sealed with beeswax or even lightweight wooden crates lined with charcoal to absorb moisture. One 15th century manual suggests stuffing articulated joints with dried moss, a trick borrowed from shipbuilders who used it to caulk hulls. The moss expanded slightly when damp, forming a temporary seal against rain while remaining easy to remove later. Speed often clashed with caution. When Henry V marched toward Agincourt, his army covered up to 16 miles a day, a pace that left little time for careful packing. Armorers traveling with the column reportedly used thick felt shrouds as quick protection, draping them over loaded saddlebags like rain cloaks for steel. Other accounts mention knights riding with their helmets strapped upside down on their pommels, creating makeshift bowls to keep rain from pooling in the visor's crevices. The poorest knights improvised with bitter creativity. Some rubbed fresh horse dung on their armor before journeys, not for superstition, but because the ammonia acted as a crude preservative against rust. Others repurposed grain sacks, stitching them into padded sleeves for individual pieces. There's even evidence of archers' waxed bowstrings being reused as temporary lacing to hold disassembled armor components together. Yet no method was foolproof. Chronicles from the Crusades tell of knights unpacking their armor in the Holy Land, only to find it fused into corroded masses by months of sea spray and sweat. A French mercenary's journal describes opening his case after an Alpine crossing to discover his breastplate, green as a meadow from trapped condensation. These weren't just inconveniences, they were potential death sentences. A single corroded rivet might snap under a mace's blow, or a stiffened knee joint could prevent a vital dodge. Perhaps the cruelest irony, that the very act of traveling to glory could destroy the tools needed to achieve it, which is why the smartest warriors, the ones who lived to boast of their exploits, treated every mile as part of the battle, and their armor cases as another front line in the endless war against decay. Behind every knight's shining armor stood an unsung hero, the armorer. These master craftsmen wielded hammers and tongs like surgical tools, capable of resurrecting a battle-battered suit from the brink of ruin. Unlike the daily maintenance handled by squires, armor repairs demanded expertise that bordered on wizardry. Picture a workshop where the rhythmic clang of metal echoed like a blacksmith's heartbeat, where a single misstruck blow could turn a salvageable cuirass into scrap. Dents were the most common wounds. A mace strike might leave a breastplate bowed inward like a crushed tin cup, threatening to constrict a knight's breathing. Armorers had tricks for this. They'd place the damaged piece over a rounded steel stake called a doming block, then hammer it outward with precise, concentric taps too forceful, and the metal would thin dangerously, too timid, and the dent would stubbornly cling. Some used heated sandbags as backing, the granules shifting to support the metal's curve as it was coaxed back into shape. For particularly stubborn depressions, they'd employ a technique called planishing, smoothing the surface with a polished hammer that left the metal sleek as poured mercury. But not all damage was so straightforward. Broken rivets, those tiny metal pins holding articulated plates together, could paralyze an entire limb's movement if left unfixed. Replacing them required an armorer's patience and a jeweler's precision. First, the shattered remnants had to be punched out without enlarging the hole. Then, a new rivet hand forged to match the exact thickness was inserted and peened over with a rounded punch, creating a head smooth enough not to chafe the knight's undergarments. Surviving account books reveal some nobles paid extra for rivets made of brass or even silver, believing the softer metals reduced friction for smoother movement. The real test came with cracked or split plates. Unlike wood, steel couldn't simply be glued. Some armorers practiced a form of medieval welding, heating the edges until they glowed cherry red, then hammering them together with a flux of powdered glass to prevent oxidation. Others opted for subtler solutions, cutting out the damaged section and scarfing in a new piece so seamlessly that only under candlelight could the repair be spotted. A Milanese armorer's contract from 1421 boasts of patching a visor so flawlessly that not even the angels could spy the join. Yet perhaps their most astonishing skill was reshaping entire sections after catastrophic damage. When a French knight's gorget was cleaved nearly in half by a poleaxe, his armorer didn't scrap it, He annealed the steel by heating and slowly cooling it to restore malleability, then painstakingly reshaped it over a wooden mandrel carved to match the original contours. Such feats weren't just craftsmanship, they were alchemy, turning near certain death back into protection. Armorers also played psychological roles. Before major battles, they'd circulate through camps like modern-day pit crews, performing last-minute adjustments while murmuring reassurances. Their workshops doubled as confessionals, where knights might admit a bever pinched when turning left or a quiz chafed after hours in the saddle, small vulnerabilities, too dangerous to voice in front of rivals. Some became trusted advisors, their knowledge of metal translating into tactical insights. A Nuremberg armorer's journal notes how he convinced a client to add subtle ridges to his pauldrons after observing how enemy axes tended to slide toward the neck. The best armorers signed their work like artists, etching tiny maker's marks near strap buckles or under helm linings. These weren't just boasts of pride, they were promises. Because in a world where a single flawed repair could mean a slit throat or a shattered femur, a knight's trust in his armorer ran as deep as his faith in his sword arm. And when that trust was honored, when a suit returned from the workshop not just functional but flawless, it wasn't just metal that had been restored, it was hope itself. In the clanging heart of any medieval town, two kinds of metalworkers shaped the fate of warriors: the blacksmith, master of all things forged in fire, and the armorer, a specialist whose expertise bordered on obsession. At first glance, their work might seem similar, both bent steel to their will, both breathed life into raw metal. But when it came to armor, the difference between them was the difference between a sturdy horseshoe and a helm that could turn a battle axe's death blow into a glancing scratch. Blacksmiths were the backbone of medieval craftsmanship, versatile as the anvils they pounded. They shod horses, hammered out farm tools, repaired wagon wheels. Their workshops were chaotic symphonies of utilitarian necessity. If a village knight brought in a dented cuirass, a skilled blacksmith could certainly straighten it, perhaps even patch a torn mail link, but their strength lay in breadth, not depth. Like a general practitioner treating every ailment, they addressed armor's obvious wounds but seldom its hidden vulnerabilities. A blacksmith might fix a broken strap hinge with a serviceable iron pin, unaware that the wrong alloy could corrode explosively when exposed to blood salt. Armorers, by contrast, were surgeons to the blacksmith's general physician. Trained for years under strict guild apprenticeships, they understood armor's secrets down to the molecular level. Where a blacksmith saw a curved plate, an armorer recognized how that specific curvature redirected force away from vital organs. Their workshops were quieter, more methodical, no frantic shooing of restless stallions. Just the meticulous tap-tap of hammers tuning metal like luthiers crafting violins. Every repair was a calculated act of preservation. A crack in a gauntlet's knuckle wasn't just welded shut. It was reinforced with internal ribs to prevent future failures, the repair invisible to all but another master's eye. Materials revealed another chasm in expertise. Blacksmiths typically worked with whatever iron was cheapest and most plentiful, often recycled from old tools or nails. Armorers demanded carefully sourced steels, sometimes blending ores from distant regions to achieve the perfect balance of flexibility and hardness. A Swedish armorer's notes from 1392 detail shipments of Norwegian iron for the core, Spanish for the skin, layers beaten together like Damascus steel, creating plates that could flex under a mace's blow without shattering. Techniques diverged starkly under stress. Faced with a breastplate dented by a lance strike, a blacksmith might hammer it flat from the outside, thinning the metal at the point of impact. An armorer worked from within, using rounded punches to gently coax the dent outward without sacrificing protective thickness. Some employed water-filled leather bags as backing, the liquid's pressure distributing force evenly as they worked. The difference wasn't just cosmetic. A poorly repaired dent could create a weak spot primed to fail at the next blow. Yet the deepest contrast lay in philosophy. Blacksmiths repaired to restore function. Armorers preserved legacy. Nobles often passed down suits for generations, each scratch telling a story. A guild armorer wouldn't merely fix an ancestor's battle-worn cuirass, they'd study the original maker's techniques, matching even the angle of original hammer marks to maintain continuity. In Milan, the Missaglia family workshop kept detailed ledgers of every noble armor's quirks, notes passed down like a medical history. Duke Visconti's right pauldron must be 1/8 thicker. He favors blocking overhead strikes. This specialization came at a price. While a blacksmith might charge a few pennies to mend a peasant's mail coif, armorers demanded sums comparable to modern-day specialists. Records show the French king paying an armorer the equivalent of 6 months' wages for a common soldier, just to restore the gilding on his tournament helm. Yet for those who could afford it, the investment was non-negotiable. Because in a world where the line between life and death was as thin as a dagger's edge, only a true master understood that armor wasn't just metal, it was destiny shaped by fire and skill. Battlefields had no armories, no guild masters standing by with polished tools, just desperate knights and whatever ingenuity they could muster. When a pauldron split under a morning star's blow or a gauntlet's hinge snapped mid-skirmish, warriors became instant metalsmiths, improvising with anything at hand. A broken strap might be lashed together with bowstrings or strips of leather torn from a saddle. Dented helmets were hammered back into rough shape using the flat side of an axe head or a smooth river stone heated in campfire embers. These weren't elegant solutions, but survival rarely cared about aesthetics. Some fixes bordered on madness. One account from the War of the Roses describes an English man at arms plugging a lance hole in his breastplate with hardened cheese mixed with beeswax, a grotesque temporary patch that allegedly held long enough to retreat. Another knight, his mail coif unraveling under relentless blows, reportedly stapled the rings shut with a dagger heated in a torch flame, the stench of scorched metal mixing with his own singed hair. The most resourceful turned plunder into repair kits. A Burgundian mercenary's journal brags of using silver coins purloined from a monastery to fashion emergency rivets, their softness perfect for peening over cracked hinges. Improvisation carried lethal risks. A poorly aligned repair could redirect weapon impacts inward rather than deflecting them, like a French squire at Agincourt who patched his master's quiz with a flattened cooking pot, only for the crude patch to bend inward under an arrow strike, driving splinters into the knight's thigh. Others learned the hard way that battlefield adhesives, tree resin, animal glue, even clotted blood became brittle in cold weather, failing catastrophically at the worst moment. Yet necessity bred strange brilliance. Scandinavian sagas tell of warriors stuffing grass and moss between armor layers to cushion blows, while Italian condottieri occasionally lined dents with folded parchment for extra rigidity. The true masters of battlefield repair were the mercenaries, their lives dependent on keeping gear functional between paychecks. Swiss pikemen developed a notorious trick of sewing small anvils into their banner poles, tiny, but sufficient for hammering out dents during lulls in fighting. Landsknecht veterans carried dagger tongs, modified blades with notched tips to twist broken mail rings back into place. Some free company armorers could re-rivet a shattered bever using nothing but a rock and a dagger pommel, their hands moving faster than the eye could follow. Perhaps no story captures this desperate ingenuity better than the tale of Sir Geoffrey de Charny at Poitiers. Trapped with his back to a wagon, his visor torn off and his breastplate dented shut around his ribs, he allegedly used his own teeth to pry open the metal enough to breathe, then fought on with his helmet lashed to his head by a dead man's belt. When later asked how he survived, he simply tapped the mangled armor and said, "A knight's true metal isn't in his steel, it's in his will to make it hold." History remembers the glorious victories, the shining armor, the legends, but it often forgets those who fell not to enemy blades, but to their own neglected gear. Consider the tragic case of Sir William de la Pole at the Battle of Verneuil in 1424. Chronicles describe his armor as so ridden with rust that the plates screamed like damned souls when moved. Mid-charge, his visor jammed shut from corrosion, leaving him blind as French men-at-arms swarmed his disoriented figure. His squire later confessed to neglecting oiling duties for weeks, distracted by tournament revelry. The price, a knight suffocated in his own helmet, his last breaths tasting of tarnished metal. Then there was the infamous laced armor massacre during the Crusade of Nicopolis. A group of German knights, rushing to battle without proper inspection, failed to notice their leather straps had rotted during the humid Balkan March. When the Ottoman forces attacked, the straps snapped like dry twigs under the first volley of arrows. Plates cascaded from their bodies like falling scales, leaving them flailing in padded gambesons as scimitars found flesh. One survivor's account chillingly notes how the Turks laughed as they peeled knights like overripe fruit. Even minor oversights could prove catastrophic. The Burgundian knight Jean de Wavrin wrote of watching his comrade's gorget buckle during a seemingly harmless joust. The culprit, a single neglected rivet, worn to near translucent thinness from years of friction. When the opponent's lance struck, the gorget collapsed inward, driving jagged metal into the knight's throat. What should have been a ceremonial tap became a fountain of blood, all because no one had thought to check a rivet the size of a pea. Weather turned maintenance sins into death sentences. During the Wars of the Roses, the Yorkist army marched through relentless autumn rains. Those who'd greased their armor properly fought unimpeded. Others found their limb movements increasingly sluggish as unseen rust thickened in joints. One chronicler describes a knight fighting like a man trapped in hardening cement, his elbows locking mid-swing before a poleaxe finished him. Post-battle inspections revealed his elbow cops had fused solid with orange corrosion, a preventable fate. Some neglect stemmed from arrogance rather than laziness. The boastful Castilian knight Don Rodrigo de Lara refused to let squires inspect his famed golden armor, believing it too fine for common hands to meddle with. At the siege of Granada, his arrogance shattered along with his breastplate, the once gleaming metal brittle from accumulated sweat salts. A Moorish spear found the hairline cracked no one had been allowed to check, piercing through to his heart. His last sight, the horrified face of his squire, who'd begged for months to service the armor properly. Perhaps most haunting are the silent killers, the slow, invisible failures. English court records tell of Sir Thomas Beaufort, who survived a dozen battles only to collapse dead in his courtyard years later. The autopsy, a sliver of rust from his mail coif, flaked off during a routine donning, had worked its way into his neck over months like a malignant worm. His steward's diary later revealed the truth. The mail hadn't been properly shaken clean in nearly a year, allowing rust particles to accumulate like poisonous dust. These weren't isolated incidents but grim patterns. Venetian military manuals listed armor rot as a leading cause of non-combat casualties. French royal decrees mandated weekly armor inspections after 3 dukes died in a single year from equipment failures. The message was clear. In the brutal arithmetic of medieval warfare, a speck of rust could weigh as much as a broadsword when death came calling. And it always did, for those who forgot that the deadliest enemy wasn't always the one holding a weapon. Tournament armor gleamed under the summer sun like liquid silver. But beneath that dazzling surface lay a shocking truth: these weren't battlefield suits, and their care couldn't be more different. Battle armor was built to endure chaos, its maintenance focused on survival. Tournament gear, though, was engineered for spectacle, demanding a level of polish so extreme it bordered on insanity. Imagine the difference between a workhorse and a racehorse, both magnificent, but one lived in mud and sweat, while the other existed for fleeting moments of perfection. The first glaring distinction was weight. Battle armor prioritized protection, with thicker plates that could deflect a poleaxe full force. That extra steel meant relentless maintenance, more surface area for rust to attack, more joints to grease, more crevices for grime to fester. Tournament armor, by contrast, was often half as heavy, with thinner metal artfully shaped to catch the light. Less weight meant less strain on straps and hinges, but it also made the metal more vulnerable to dents. A knight could shrug off a dented quiz in battle, but a single imperfection in a tournament's pageantry could ruin his reputation. Design complexity added another layer of challenge. Battle armor favored simplicity, smooth curves to deflect blows, minimal ornamentation that wouldn't snag on terrain. Tournament suits, though, were canvases for artistry. Etched heraldry, gilded edges, and intricate fluting turned every piece into a statement. Maintaining these details required tools more suited to a jeweler's bench than a battlefield camp. Squires used soft bristled brushes made from squirrel tails to clean delicate engravings, while battle armor got scrubbed down with boar's hair bristles rough enough to scrape off dried blood. Then there was the issue of visibility. On the battlefield, a scratch hardly mattered as long as the armor held. But in tournaments, where nobles gathered to judge a knight's discipline as much as his skill, even a fingerprint could spark whispers. Some lords employed sun squires, attendants who did nothing but hold polished shields at angles to check for streaks during pre-joust inspections. The obsession reached absurd heights in 15th century Bavaria, where one duke's contract demanded his armor be buffed with silk cloths dipped in crushed pearls, ensuring a literally blinding sheen. Materials diverged just as sharply. Battle armor often used plain carbon steel, easy to repair with basic forge skills. Tournament armor, especially for the elite, incorporated exotic alloys like white iron from the Alps, chosen for its luminous finish rather than durability. Some Italian suits even layered silver between steel plates, creating a shimmering effect when sunlight struck, stunning until the silver tarnished, requiring entire teams of artisans to restore. Storage told the same tale. Battle armor could be rolled up in waxed canvas for travel or hung in a musty armory. Tournament sets demanded climate-controlled care, wrapped in lavender-scented linens to repel moths and stored in cedar chests to prevent tarnish. The famed Duke of Burgundy's tournament gear traveled with its own tent, complete with charcoal braziers to regulate humidity, yet the cruelest irony. Tournament armor's lifespan was often measured in hours. That painstakingly polished bever might survive exactly one joust before a lance reduced it to a crumpled wreck. Battle armor, for all its rough treatment, could last decades with proper care. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson. While war demanded resilience, spectacle demanded sacrifice. And in the glittering world of tournaments, no cost was too high for a moment of perfection. Chainmail whispered when plate armor clanged, a fabric of metal that demanded care as meticulous as any suit of steel. Unlike rigid plates, a hauberk's thousands of interlocking rings were vulnerable to subtler enemies' grime that crept between links like invisible poison, rust that spread from one ring to another like a plague, and the slow, insidious fraying of edges that could unravel an entire defense over time. Washing chainmail wasn't just maintenance, it was a ritual. Picture a squire hauling a sweat-stiffened hauberk to a riverbank, plunging it into icy water, and agitating the rings with wooden paddles to dislodge weeks of accumulated filth. The alternative, stale urine, its ammonia cutting through grease better than water alone, though no knight wanted to march into battle smelling like a tavern's latrine. Oiling was even more critical. Without proper lubrication, mail became a screeching liability, its rings grinding together loud enough to betray a nighttime patrol. But the wrong oil could be worse than none at all. Animal fats turned rancid in heat, attracting dirt that transformed into an abrasive paste, accelerating wear. Smart armorers used light vegetable oils, sometimes infused with beeswax for a protective coating that didn't gum up the links. The technique mattered as much as the substance. Oil was dabbed onto each row of rings with a feather or cloth-wrapped stick, ensuring even coverage without drowning the metal. A well-oiled hauberk moved like liquid, silent and deadly, a far cry from the rusty, bird cages worn by neglectful mercenaries, their every step announcing their approach with metallic shrieks. Repairs were a test of patience. A single broken link could unravel a section faster than a dropped stitch in knitting, leaving a gap wide enough for a dagger's cruel kiss. Fixing it required specialized tools, tiny pliers with rounded jaws to avoid scratching adjacent rings, and a supply of spare links forged in matching patterns. The process resembled medieval surgery, bending open the damaged link's neighbors just enough to slip in a replacement, then crimping everything shut with agonizing precision. Some armorers kept pre-riveted links for emergency repairs, their edges filed smooth to prevent snagging on the wearer's gambeson. The wealthiest knights even traveled with mail menders, skilled servants who could reweave a damaged sleeve mid-campaign as easily as a tailor darning socks. Storage posed unique challenges. Hung improperly, a hauberk's weight could stretch the collar into a gaping maw. Folded carelessly, its rings pressed together, inviting corrosion. The solution: suspending mail from wide wooden dowels that distributed the weight evenly, or draping it over barrel-shaped stands that mimicked the human torso. Some Italian armor manuals recommend stuffing the sleeves with lamb's wool to maintain their shape, while Flemish accounts describe storing mail in barrels of dry oats, the grains absorbing moisture while preventing tangling. The true masters of mail maintenance were the Saracens, whose armies wielded it long after Europe embraced plate. Their techniques bordered on alchemy, washing mail in sand-filled goatskin bags to polish the rings evenly, or boiling it in vinegar and salt water to create a deliberate patina that resisted deeper rust. A Crusader's chronicle grudgingly admits finding captured Saracen mail, bright as moonbeams after years in the desert, while his own rusted, like a shipwreck's anchor. Neglect carried grotesque consequences. Unwashed mail accumulated sweat salts that ate through metal like acid, leaving rings thin as parchment. A French knight's effigy shows his hauberk's lower links corroded entirely, likely from years of brushing against damp grass. Worse were the hidden failures. A single weakened ring could snap under a sword's impact, scattering shards into the wound like shrapnel. No wonder wise warriors treated their mail like a second skin, because in the end, it was the only thing standing between them and a blade's cold embrace. A knight's helmet was more than just metal, it was a sealed world where breath turned to condensation. Sweat dripped into eyes, and the stench of battle lingered long after the fighting ended. Imagine strapping on a helm after weeks of campaigning, only to be hit by a wall of stale air thick with the reek of old blood, rust, and worse. Unlike other armor pieces, helmets trapped everything inside every exhale, every drop of perspiration, every shred of decay. Keeping them breathable and clean wasn't just about comfort. It was a battle against suffocation and disease. The first line of defense was the lining, usually padded with wool or linen. This layer absorbed sweat and cushioned blows, but also became a breeding ground for foul odors. Wealthy knights could afford removable linings, swapped out and washed like modern insoles. Others resorted to stuffing aromatic herbs, lavender, mint, or rosemary between the padding and metal, a desperate attempt to mask the inevitable funk. But herbs alone couldn't stop the real menace: moisture. After hours of combat, condensation would pool in the helmet's recesses, rusting rivets and fostering mildew. Some helmets featured tiny ventilation holes, but these were double-edged while they let in air. They also let in rain, dust, or an opponent's well-aimed dagger tip. Cleaning methods ranged from practical to bizarre. A common technique involved filling the helmet with hot sand, which absorbed grease and loosened grime when shaken violently. Others soaked the entire helm in vinegar, though this risked corroding delicate visor mechanisms. The most desperate warriors turned to urine, its ammonia breaking down stubborn stains, but leaving behind a scent no amount of rosewater could fully erase. After the Battle of Toten, one Yorkist knight's squire reported scrubbing his lord's helmet with crushed garlic and salt, a concoction that allegedly stung the nose worse than the enemy's arrows. Then there was the horror of battlefield aftermath. Helmets struck by heavy weapons, often deformed, jamming shut with their wearers still inside. The infamous blood funnel effect occurred when a punctured helmet channeled gore inward, forcing the knight to breathe through a crimson mist. Survivors of such ordeals often had their helmets ceremonially burned afterward, unable to bear the psychological weight of wearing them again. Storage was its own challenge. Hanging a helmet by its chin strap risked stretching it out of shape, while placing it upright invited vermin to nest inside. Clever squires devised wooden helmet stands with protruding pegs to keep the interior dry, and aired out some even tucked sacks of quicklime inside overnight to absorb moisture. The truly meticulous would pack their lord's helm with dried peas during long sea voyages, the legumes swelling to block salt air while doubling as emergency rations. Yet for all these efforts, no helmet stayed fresh forever. Rust crept into hinge crevices, leather straps stiffened into brittle cords, and padding grew stiff with dried sweat. Perhaps that's why so many knights developed rituals around their helmets, blessing them with holy water, anointing them with scented oils before tournaments, or whispering prayers into the darkened interior before battle. In those moments, cleaning wasn't just maintenance. It was an act of reverence for the metal shell that stood between a warrior's skull and the screaming chaos of war. Of all the pieces in a knight's armor, none demanded as much obsessive attention as the gauntlets. Those intricate metal gloves where protection and dexterity battled for supremacy. Every joint, every articulated plate had to move like silk while still deflecting sword blows that could shatter bone. Picture the delicate balance. Fingers that could grasp a rein or a blade's hilt one moment, then lock into an unyielding fist the next. Achieving this wasn't just craftsmanship, it was high-wire act maintenance, where a single grain of sand in the wrong rivet could mean the difference between a perfect parry and a crippled hand. The real challenge lay in the joints. Unlike rigid breastplates or helmets, gauntlets were a symphony of moving parts, knuckle plates sliding over metacarpal guards, finger scales overlapping like miniature roof tiles. Each articulation point was a potential failure waiting to happen. Rust could freeze joints mid-combat, leaving a knight unable to close his fist around his sword. Dirt or sweat residue could turn once smooth plates into grinding abrasives, wearing down metal until it snapped under stress. Squires spent hours with needle-thin picks and oil-soaked rags, cleaning between every crevice. Some even used feather quills to flick out debris, their tips soft enough not to scratch the delicate gilding on noble gauntlets. Lubrication here was a sacred art. Too much oil attracted grit, too little invited corrosion. The smartest armorers used linseed oil thinned with turpentine, just viscous enough to cling to joints without gumming up. Others swore by beeswax mixtures, rubbed warm into seams where plates met, creating a self-replenishing barrier. A surviving Swiss mercenary's diary describes storing gauntlets in bags of rye flour, overnight the grains absorbing moisture while leaving a fine dusting that reduced friction. Weather transformed care into desperation. Rain swelled leather straps inside gauntlets, tightening them like vises until circulation cut off. Cold turned oils to glue, freezing fingers in half-clenched claws. There are accounts of knights holding gauntlets over campfires before dawn battles not to warm them, but to melt stiffened lubricants. The luckiest had fur-lined versions for winter campaigns. The rest suffered blackened fingertips and the constant dread of frostbitten joints locking at the worst moment. Repairs bordered on microsurgery. A single bent finger plate could throw off the entire hand's articulation. Armorers used miniature anvils and doll-sized hammers to reshape distortions, testing each correction by sliding parchment strips between joints. If the paper caught, the repair failed. Rivets here were smaller than peppercorns, their replacement requiring magnifying lenses and tweezers. The Milanese armorer Missaglia once boasted he could repin a knuckle joint while blindfolded, a claim tested and proven when a Duke's champion needed midnight repairs before a duel. Battlefield improvisation could be gruesome. A chronicle from the 100 Years' War tells of an English longbowman turned knight using arrowheads to prise open his crushed gauntlet after a mace strike. Another account describes a landsknecht packing his damaged finger joints with candle wax mid-siege, creating a temporary mold that hardened into a crude but functional cast. The most extreme fix. A French knight's memoir recounts severing his own mangled gauntlet with a dagger when its hinges jammed shut around a deep wound, preferring blood loss to gangrene. Yet for all their fragility, well-maintained gauntlets were marvels. A properly serviced pair could last decades, their plates developing a patina like polished stone. Some developed quirks, a thumb that loosened after rain, a pinky plate that sang when struck. Quirks knights learned like their own heartbeat. In the end, that's what separated functional armor from legendary gear. Not just the metal, but the intimate knowledge of every whisper, every catch, every hidden vulnerability. Because when steel met steel, it wasn't the strongest gauntlet that won, it was the one whose joints moved as smoothly as the thoughts of the warrior wearing it. Leather was the silent backbone of every suit of armor, the straps that held steel plates together, the laces that secured gauntlets, the underpadding that kept metal from grinding against skin. Yet unlike shining steel, leather had enemies more relentless than any battlefield foe. Drying that turned supple straps brittle as dead branches, sweat that rotted stitching from the inside out, and mold that crept through storerooms like a plague. A knight might survive 1,000 blows to his breastplate, only to fall when a single leather hinge snapped at the worst possible moment. Conditioning was a constant battle. Armor-grade leather wasn't the soft, pliable material of boots or gloves. It was thick, oil-soaked hide hardened almost to the toughness of wood. Keeping it flexible required concoctions that would make a modern tanner's head spin. Animal fats like lard or bear grease were staples, rubbed in with the heels of squires' hands until the leather grew warm from friction. In Mediterranean regions, olive oil mixed with beeswax created a weather-resistant barrier, while Scandinavian warriors swore by concoctions of fish oil and birch tar, their helmets smelling like a dockside smithy. The wealthiest lords used exotic blends, saffron-infused oils from Persia, or rosehip extracts said to prevent cracking in freezing temperatures, but oils alone couldn't stop the inevitable. Leather under constant stress, like the straps holding a cuirass to pauldrons, needed monthly soaking in fat baths, submerged in heated tallow for hours to replenish lost moisture. Surviving records from the Tower of London describe knights testing strap flexibility by looping them around dagger hilts. Any that cracked or showed white stress lines were condemned to the recycling vat. The smartest warriors rotated multiple sets of straps, letting rested leather recover while another set bore the burden. Undergarments posed a different challenge. The gambeson, a quilted jacket worn beneath armor, was a sponge for sweat, blood, and grime. Washing risked shrinking the tightly stitched layers, so squires developed brutal workarounds. One Burgundian manual recommends beating dirt loose with wooden paddles, then hanging gambesons in smoke houses where the heat and resinous fumes killed lice and bacteria. Others buried sweat-soaked padding in barrels of dry oats, the grains pulling moisture away while leaving the fabric intact. Replacement cycles were merciless. Tournament straps might last a season, but battlefield gear demanded weekly inspections. A single frayed lace on a greave could unravel during a sprint, sending a knight sprawling before enemy spears. Some knights carried death pouches, small kits containing pre-cut straps, needles, and waxed thread for emergency repairs. The infamous Black Company mercenaries even employed a dedicated strap master who traveled with pre-soaked replacement parts, ready to swap out failing leather mid-campaign. Storage was a science unto itself. Damp cellars turned leather into moldy ruins, while sunlit rooms baked it into jerky. Ideal conditions meant hanging straps in cedar-lined chests with blocks of camphor to repel insects, or for the pragmatic, rubbing them with crushed tobacco leaves, a trick learned from Mongol traders. The worst fate, storing armor fully assembled, where hidden contact points between metal and leather created silent corrosion. More than one knight opened his campaign chest to find his straps half-eaten by acidic rust blooms. Neglect carried grotesque consequences. Chronicles tell of a French chevalier whose gorget strap failed during a joust, the hardened leather snapping like a dry twig. The sudden shift in weight twisted his helmet violently, breaking his neck before the opponent's lance even struck. At Agincourt, English longbowmen targeted knights with visibly dry, cracked straps, knowing their armor might literally fall apart under arrow volleys. Yet for all its fragility, well-maintained leather could outlast its wearer. The Vatican's armory holds a 12th century gambeson still supple enough to wear, its layers of linen and deerskin preserved by generations of caretakers who understood one immutable truth: steel won battles, but leather won wars. Because no matter how brilliant the sword arm, every knight depended on the humble strap, the fragile thread holding his world together. Winter transformed armor care into a desperate race against the cold's invisible siege. Metal contracts in freezing temperatures, turning once smooth joints into stiff, shrieking traps. Knights faced a cruel paradox: the same oils that kept plates gliding smoothly in summer became gummy sludge when frost gripped the land. Some resorted to heating their armor near hearths before donning it, risking warped metal or scorched padding if left too long. Others mixed animal fats with spirits like aqua vitae, creating makeshift antifreeze that stayed viscous in icy winds. The most meticulous warriors stored their armor on wooden frames near smoldering braziers overnight, maintaining just enough warmth to keep hinge pins from seizing. But even these measures couldn't stop the silent killer, condensation. A knight riding from freezing outdoors into a torch-lit hall would watch in horror as his breastplate fogged with moisture, the trapped dampness blooming into rust by morning. Summer brought its own torments. Humidity curled into every crevice like a living thing, turning neglected gauntlets into miniature swamps. Squires worked double shifts during rainy seasons, swapping out wool-stuffed storage bags for crushed charcoal pouches that absorbed ambient moisture. In Mediterranean campaigns, the wealthy slathered their armor in olive oil thickened with beeswax, creating a barrier against salt-laden sea air that could pit steel within hours. But the real nightmare was sweat, not just the stench, but its corrosive power. A knight's underpadding soaked through after minutes of summer combat, the brine eating at metal like acid. Accounts from the Crusades describe men discovering their mail shirts half disintegrated after weeks of marching, the rings fused into orange crusts by relentless perspiration. Spring demanded vigilance against an unexpected foe: pollen. Fine granules worked into joints like abrasive powder, grinding between plates during tournaments or drills. Smart armorers rinsed pieces in barrel-collected rainwater, softer than well water and less likely to leave mineral deposits. Autumn's threat was more insidious. Falling temperatures paired with lingering dampness created ideal conditions for creeping rust, a phenomenon where corrosion spread beneath oil layers unnoticed. Burgundian military manuals recommended a brutal autumn ritual: stripping armor completely bare, scrubbing it with vinegar-soaked rye straw, then reapplying lubricants from scratch. Regional practices reflected local climates. Norse warriors buried their mail shirts in barrels of snow during winter thaws, letting the meltwater carry away salt and grime. Italian condottieri suspended armor in grape pressing rooms after harvest, where the dry, tannin-rich air naturally inhibited rust. In the Scottish Highlands, where rain fell sideways, clansmen rubbed their gear with bog butter, a rancid, waxy substance that repelled water better than any oil. The cruelest lesson: seasonal shifts could expose poor quality armor in an instant. A beautifully polished cuirass might hide thin spots that cracked during winter's contraction, while a flawless-looking vambrace could split along hidden stress fractures when summer heat expanded the metal. Perhaps that's why the wisest warriors didn't just maintain their armor, they learned its whispers, its vulnerabilities, its seasonal moods, because in the end, surviving the elements required more than strength or skill. It demanded the humility to recognize that even the finest steel bowed to nature's rhythms, and only those who listened would live to see another spring. A knight's armor didn't maintain itself, it demanded an army of unseen hands. Enter the squire, the unsung hero whose fingertips knew every dent, every hidden hinge, every strap that needed tightening. These young men weren't just assistants, they were guardians of survival, trained from dawn till dusk in rituals so precise they bordered on sacred. Picture a squire's daily grind, waking before his lord to inspect each plate for overnight rust, his breath fogging in the cold armory air as he ran calloused fingers along edges most knights never noticed. A single missed speck of corrosion could mean a jammed visor during battle, so his touch had to be as sure as a surgeon's. Dressing a knight wasn't simply strapping on metal, it was a choreographed dance. First came the padded gambeson, laced snugly to absorb blows and prevent chafing. Then the mail hauberk, its weight carefully distributed across the shoulders. Finally, the plate armor, each piece fastened in a specific sequence to avoid unbalanced pressure. A skilled squire could complete the process in under 10 minutes, his hands moving with the efficiency of a clockmaker's. The wrong buckle tightened first might leave a gap under the armpit. An over-tightened greave could cut off circulation mid-charge. Some noble households even practiced blind drills, where squires dressed their lords in pitch darkness, memorizing every strap and latch by touch alone. But the real test came after combat. While knights rested or boasted of their exploits, squires faced the grueling aftermath. Blood-caked armor required immediate attention. Left too long, it would stain or corrode. One Burgundian manual describes a post-battle ritual. Rinse with cool water, never warm, which set blood like dye. Scrub with sand and vinegar, then oil every surface before the metal could sigh into rust. Squires traded tricks like battlefield medics, using onion juice to break down stubborn gore, or packing mud-clogged joints with wet bread to draw out moisture. The wealthiest lords employed armor smiths, who traveled with their retinues, carrying portable anvils to hammer out dents by campfire light. Servants played equally vital, if less glamorous, roles. Women in castle laundries boiled gambesons in huge vats of lye, fighting lice and rot. Pages polished buckles with chamois leather until they mirrored the sun. Even stable hands contributed. Their carefully rendered horse fat became the base for weatherproofing oils. Hierarchy dictated every task. Junior squires handled mail cleaning, while only the most trusted attendants touched a lord's tournament helm, its delicate visor mechanisms requiring feather-light adjustments. Neglect wasn't an option. Records from the English court show squires whipped for letting sweat pool in a gauntlet's fingertips, or for failing to notice a stretched strap before it snapped during a joust. The French knight Crescent de Troyes wrote of dismissing an entire staff after discovering his cuirass hinges stiff with neglect, a betrayal he likened to sleeping beside an unsheathed dagger. Yet for all the drudgery, these roles bred legends. The squire Guillaume de Box once saved his master's life by spotting a hairline crack in a breastplate others had overlooked. Another, Pierre de Crayon, earned knighthood after improvising a repair mid-battle using his belt to secure a falling pauldron long enough for his lord to flee in ambush. Their stories whisper a truth louder than clashing steel. Behind every great knight stood greater servants, their hands keeping death at bay, one polished plate at a time. Armor wasn't just steel, it was a vessel for the sacred. Long after the forge's fire cooled, knights imbued their battle-worn plates with rituals that blurred the line between maintenance and sacrament. In dimly lit chapels across Europe, priests anointed freshly polished breastplates with holy water, tracing the sign of the cross over vulnerable joints where death might slither through. Breton legends tell of swordsmiths whispering psalms into helmets before sealing their visors, believing the words would vibrate in the metal like trapped prayers. These weren't mere superstitions, they were acts of psychological alchemy, transforming cold alloy into spiritual armor. Families guarded armor care traditions like crown jewels. The Dukes of Burgundy mandated their heirs polish their first suit using only linen woven by blind nuns, the purest hands crafting the purest cloth. Spanish noble houses employed armor monks, Benedictine brothers who mixed their sanctified saliva with pumice to create cleansing pastes said to repel evil. A surviving Venetian manuscript details the Doge's annual ritual. On the feast day of Saint Theodore, his armor was disassembled and carried in procession through St. Mark's Basilica, each piece laid on separate altars to absorb unique blessings: the greaves for steadfastness, the gauntlets for righteous strikes. Tournaments became theaters for these sacred routines. Before the joust, German knights would have their squires breathe into their helmets not to fog the metal, but to transfer fighting spirit through shared breath. English contestants buried their spurs in churchyard soil overnight, believing the bones of saints would harden the steel. The most striking ritual belonged to Polish hussars, who ritually darkened their armor with smoke from Easter candles, creating a shadowed finish they called the Lord's Patina, protection both physical and divine. Grief too found expression in metal. When a knight died, his armor often underwent symbolic death care. Italian wool specified exact instructions: Milanese condottieri requested their cuirasses be rubbed with rosemary and salt for 7 days to purge battle's taint before passing to heirs. French nobles had their helmets filled with quicklime, the caustic powder eroding the interior to prevent any lesser man from wearing their shape. In Wales, broken swords were hammered into armor stands, the warrior's essence forever supporting his shell. Perhaps the most poignant rituals belong not to knights, but to those who maintain them. Squires in Castile whispered their sins into polishing cloths before burning them, believing guilt could tarnish steel. Scottish armor-bearers drank from the same cup as their lords while oiling joints, creating a covenant of shared fate. These acts reveal an essential truth. Caring for armor wasn't about preserving objects, but honoring the fragile humanity they contained. Every blessed rivet, every anointed strap, whispered the same desperate hope that devotion might tip the scales when steel alone wasn't enough. Edward the Black Prince didn't just wear armor, he treated it like a living extension of his will. The heir to England's throne became legendary not just for his battlefield brilliance, but for the almost fanatical care he lavished on his gear. His personal inventory lists reveal a man obsessed with detail. Sulfur-scented oils for his mail, lavender-stuffed pouches to keep his gambeson fresh. Even a dedicated squire whose sole duty was polishing the gold-chased edges of his cuirass before tournaments. But his most famous ritual involved salt. After the Battle of Poitiers, where his victory over the French king shocked Europe, witnesses reported Edward methodically rinsing his blood-stained armor in seawater, not just to clean it, but because he believed the salt would harden the steel as it hardened his resolve. Whether superstition or science, it worked. That same suit survived a dozen more battles without a single cracked plate. Across the Channel, French knight Bertrand du Guesclin took a starkly different approach. Known as the Black Dog of Brocéliande for his relentless campaigning, he famously neglected his armor's shine in favor of brutal practicality. Chronicles describe his entourage carrying barrels of rancid bear fat to grease joints during long marches, the stench so overpowering enemies could smell his approach. Yet his refusal to indulge in polish hid a deeper wisdom, while other knights' ornate plate grew brittle from overcleaning. Du Guesclin's deliberately dulled armor developed a tough patina that resisted rust better than any oil. His secret, letting thin layers of corrosion form naturally, then scrubbing just enough to prevent flaking, a technique modern metallurgists confirm creates superior rust resistance. Then there was the flamboyant Italian condottiero Sigismondo Pandolfo Malatesta, who turned armor care into high art. His workshop housed a team of Persian metalworkers who perfected a lost wax technique for applying intricate silver filigree that never tarnished. But his real innovation was psychological before major battles. He'd have his squires strike his armor with wooden mallets while he meditated inside, believing the vibrations awakened the metal's memory of the forge. Whether mystical or madness, his troops swore his gear gleamed brighter under moonlight, unnerving superstitious foes. The contrast couldn't be sharper with Genghis Khan, the Hussite general who revolutionized warfare with his peasant armies. Blind in one eye and leading farmers against steel-clad knights, he repurposed looted armor with savage ingenuity. His men boiled captured plate in vinegar for days, softening it enough to reshape for smaller frames, then painted the refitted suits with tar to mute reflections, creating the first recorded use of stealth armor. Genghis Khan's real genius lay in maintenance. He mandated every soldier carry a whetstone and linen roll, not just for weapons, but to remove the tar before reapplying it fresh, a discipline that kept his ragtag forces better protected than many professional armies. Perhaps no knight's relationship with armor was more tragic than that of Pierre Terrel, the Chevalier de Bayard. Known as the Knight Without Fear and Beyond Reproach, he famously refused to retreat even when his gilded tournament armor, meant for show, not battle, was pierced by 6 lance strikes at Ravenna. Surviving accounts describe his squires weeping as they pried the ruined plates from his wounds, the metal so fused with blood it had to be melted off. Yet even in agony, Bayard insisted on supervising the repairs himself, whispering instructions for annealing the steel as surgeons stitched his flesh. His final suit, still dented from a dozen mortal battles, was carried empty on horseback at his funeral, a ghost in steel outliving its master. These stories reveal a universal truth: a knight's armor was more than equipment. It was a diary written in scratches, a canvas painted with grime and polish, a silent witness to every triumph and failure. Whether scrubbed with salt or slathered in stinking fat, whether gleaming like a saint's reliquary or blackened with deliberate grime, each suit carried the indelible imprint of the man who wore it, and the hands that kept it fighting fit. Buried beneath castle ruins and hidden in forgotten crypts, archaeology offers silent testimony to how knights truly cared for their armor. One of the most revealing finds came from Visby, Sweden, a mass grave from 1361, where fallen soldiers were interred still clad in their battle-worn mail. The rusted rings tell a grisly but invaluable story. Sections near the body show advanced corrosion from trapped sweat and blood, while outer layers exposed to air fared better. But the real revelation lies in the scattered remnants of woolen cloth found tangled with the mail, likely the remains of oil-soaked linens used for cleaning, confirming written accounts of warriors carrying maintenance kits even into doomed battles. More intimate evidence comes from the Dover Castle Armory excavation, where a trove of 15th-century armor tools was discovered beneath collapsed flooring. Alongside typical hammers and tongs lay unexpected artifacts: smooth river stones of uniform size likely for polishing curved plates, clay jars still holding traces of animal fat mixtures, and most telling, a set of small bone scrapers with wear patterns suggesting daily use. These weren't emergency repair tools, but specialized implements for meticulous upkeep, their presence in a garrison fortress proving maintenance wasn't just for nobility. The Mary Rose wreckage, Henry VIII's sunken warship, provided a time capsule of Tudor-era armor care. Divers recovered helmets packed with moss, not for protection, but as improvised humidity absorbers during sea voyages. Even more striking were the stacked brigandine plates wrapped in waxed parchment, some bearing fingerprints pressed into the grease centuries ago by long-dead armorers. Conservationists found these parchment-shielded pieces had resisted corrosion far better than exposed ones, validating historical accounts of layered storage techniques. Perhaps no discovery shocks like the perfectly preserved gauntlets from Cherbourg Castle. Locked in an airtight chest since the 1400s, their internal leather straps remained supple as the day they were last oiled. Analysis revealed an ingenious 3-layer treatment: beeswax as a moisture barrier, fish oil for flexibility, and a final rub of crushed rosemary leaves to deter insects. Modern tests showed this combination outperformed single-substance treatments, proving medieval armorers understood material science at a molecular level. Less glamorous finds speak volumes too. Excavations at Caerphilly Castle uncovered a waste pit filled with discarded polishing rags, their fibers embedded with abrasive particles. Microscopic examination showed progressive grit sizes: coarse sand for initial rust removal, finer pumice for smoothing, and even what appears to be crushed eggshell for final buffing. This mirrors guild manuals describing graduated polishing regimens, but here we have physical proof of the exhausting labor behind the shine. The most haunting evidence comes from armor itself. Metallurgical analysis of surviving breastplates reveals telltale thinning at specific points, not from battle damage, but from centuries of overzealous polishing. At Warwick Castle, a 15th-century cuirass shows uneven wear where generations of squires focused on the more visible front, neglecting the back until a near-translite patch developed under the left shoulder blade. A deadly oversight had its owner relied on that armor in battle. A well-placed arrow might have found that weakened spot. These fragments and residues form an unintentional archive, proving maintenance was neither myth nor luxury, but a relentless discipline as vital as swordsmanship. When we examine a corroded rivet or a miraculously preserved strap, we're not just studying metal, we're touching the ghostly imprint of countless unnamed hands that fought time itself, one meticulous stroke at a time. Modern reenactors don't just wear armor, they live inside it. breathing life into centuries-old maintenance rituals with a dedication that borders on reverence. At dawn, while most of the world sleeps, you'll find them hunched over work tables, hands blackened from polishing compounds they've mixed themselves, following recipes cribbed from guild manuscripts and trial-and-error experimentation. Their workshops aren't museums but living laboratories where history's theories meet the unforgiving test of practicality. Take the Society for Creative Anachronism's annual Rust Wars event, where reenactors compete to restore corroded artifacts using only period-accurate methods. One participant, a metallurgist by day, discovered vinegar-soaked linen wrapped around mail for 48 hours removed rust better than modern chemicals, confirming accounts from a 15th century Burgundian manual dismissed by scholars as exaggeration. The real education comes from discomfort. Reenactors quickly learn why medieval squires dreaded rainy seasons when their meticulously oiled joints stiffen overnight during outdoor events. A Swedish group's experiment with authentic lard-based lubricants went viral after participants discovered the grease attracted not just period-accurate grime, but also very modern bears during a forest campaign. Meanwhile, a Polish knights guild discovered the hard way that beeswax polished armor becomes treacherously slick in summer heat when a member slid from his saddle during a joust, an echo of warnings found in forgotten French marginalia. These enthusiasts have become accidental historians, debunking myths through brute repetition. The long-held assumption that urine was a last resort cleaner collapsed when the York Medieval Society replicated weekly urine rinses on test plates and found the ammonia created a protective patina rivaling modern sealants. Conversely, romantic notions of armor gleaming like mirrors shattered during a German reenactment, where participants polishing for 6 hours daily still couldn't match the absurd brightness of Hollywood depictions. The truth, they learned, was somewhere between grimy practicality and ceremonial brilliance. Armor cared for but not worshipped. Perhaps most revealing are the invisible techniques reenactors have resurrected. A Venetian-style armor kit in California stays rust-free year-round thanks to a trick borrowed from Crusader chronicles, storing it with sacks of rice that absorb ambient moisture. Another group swears by stuffing articulated joints with dried lavender stalks, a method found in a nun's herbal from Poitiers that repels insects while leaving metal faintly fragrant. These aren't just quaint traditions, they're rediscovered wisdom, solutions forged through necessity rather than nostalgia. Yet for all their passion, reenactors face brutal reminders of why modern methods prevailed. After spending 3 days hand-forging replacement rivets for a damaged bever, a British blacksmith finally understood why medieval accounts mentioned squires crying over lost fasteners. The real horror came when his painstakingly crafted pins sheared during a combat demonstration, proof that period techniques, while functional, demanded constant vigilance. What emerges from their collective experience is a humbling truth. Armor maintenance wasn't just a chore, but a lifelong dialogue between warrior and metal. Modern comforts can't replicate the visceral understanding medieval knights had of their gear the way a reenactor in Maine instinctively knows his salet's visor will stick after 2 hours in fog, or how a woman in Kyoto has learned to identify the first whiff of unstable rust beneath her greave's oiled surface. They've come to appreciate armor not as costume but as a second skeleton, demanding care as intimate and unending as breathing. Hollywood loves showing knights as clumsy metal statues, wheezing inside their suits until a crane lifts them onto horses. It makes for great drama, but it's pure nonsense. The truth: a well-fitted suit of armor was as flexible as a second skin, allowing somersaults, cartwheels, even full-speed sprints. Modern tests with authentic reproductions prove a trained knight could mount a horse unassisted in under 5 seconds. No cranes, no winches, just skill. The myth likely started with jousting armor, which was deliberately stiff to absorb lance impacts. But even then, dismounted knights could still move with surprising agility. Another stubborn fallacy claims armor turned warriors into slow, clanking targets. Reality was the opposite. Battlefield armor averaged just 45 to 60 pounds, distributed evenly across the body. That's less than a modern soldier's pack, and far better balanced. Manuscripts describe knights scaling siege ladders in full plate, while combat manuals from the period show complex grappling techniques impossible in rigid suits. The real limitation wasn't mobility, but endurance. After hours of combat, exhaustion, not the armor's weight, slowed men down. Then there's the rust myth, the idea that rain or sweat instantly corroded armor into uselessness. While moisture was certainly an enemy, medieval metallurgy was more sophisticated than we credit. High carbon steel alloys, combined with meticulous oiling regimens, created armor that could withstand weeks of campaigning. The real danger wasn't immediate rust, but gradual neglect, like the French knights at Agincourt who skipped maintenance during the muddy march, only to find their joints stiff when English arrows darkened the sky. Perhaps the most absurd misconception is that armor was universally uncomfortable. Surviving examples reveal tailored precision, articulated knees and elbows mirroring natural movement, padded linings softer than modern tactical gear. Wealthy knights even had their armor broken in by squires who wore it for weeks, ensuring every strap and hinge moved smoothly before battle. The poorest foot soldiers might suffer with ill-fitting munitions plate, but for nobles, armor felt like a second skin because living in it meant surviving in it. The truth is, these myths reveal more about our modern ignorance than medieval reality. Armor wasn't some primitive burden, it was the cutting-edge technology of its time, designed by generations of masters who understood human movement as intimately as metalwork. When we dismiss it as clunky or ineffective, we insult the ingenuity of craftsmen who turned steel into a dance partner for the deadliest waltz imaginable. And that's the real tragedy, not the weight of the armor, but the weight of our misconceptions. The care knights poured into their armor wasn't just maintenance, it was an act of devotion, a ritual as vital as sharpening a sword or praying before battle. Every polished plate, every oiled hinge, every meticulously repaired dent spoke of something deeper than practicality. This was the preservation of identity, a warrior's covenant with the metal that stood between him and oblivion. Imagine the hands that touched these suits, not just knights, but squires, armorers, servants, each contributing to an unbroken chain of care stretching across generations. A suit of armor wasn't just equipment, it was a testament to discipline, a physical manifestation of the relentless effort required to survive in a world where death waited in every shadow. What's striking isn't just the methods they used, but the mindset behind them. A knight who neglected his armor wasn't merely lazy, he was flirting with suicide. The stakes were written in scars and whispered in cautionary tales. The duke who suffocated in a jammed helmet, the mercenary whose rotted straps failed mid-charge, the tournament champion humiliated by a single streak of tarnish. These weren't just stories, they were lessons hammered into steel and bone. Yet there's beauty in this relentless upkeep, a poetry in the way knights transformed necessity into art. The suffused glow of tournament armor under sunlight, the silent grace of well-oiled joints, the pride in a suit that had weathered decades of combat, these were triumphs as meaningful as any battlefield victory. Armor care was a language, one that spoke of status, skill, and survival in equal measure. The richest nobles flaunted exotic oils and gilded polish, while hardened mercenaries relied on fish grease and grit. But whether in a castle armory or a smoky camp, the goal was the same: to honor the metal that honored them. Today, we might see their efforts as excessive, even obsessive. But in an era when a single flaw could mean death, their dedication makes perfect sense. Every stroke of the polishing cloth, every drop of oil, every midnight repair was a defiance of fate, a refusal to let decay have the final word. These warriors understood something timeless. That survival isn't just about strength or courage, it's about the quiet, uncelebrated labor that happens between battles. So what aspect of knightly life fascinates you most? The brutal reality of battlefield repairs, the sacred rituals of maintenance, or the way armor became an extension of the warrior's very soul? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear which piece of this legacy speaks to you.